This is Hot Goose Summer, the hottest and the goosiest pastimes for you.
Welcome to the first and thus far greatest episode of Hot Goose Summer. I'm Luke.
And I'm Claire.
We're close friends living in different cities, keeping in touch via some really good and really bad media recommendations. Claire, how's it hanging?
You know, it's hanging pretty good. It's finally warm outside, and thank God for that. But it sort of came late, you know? We didn't have any spring, and now it's just summer.
I do feel extremely scammed by the spring. I don't know. It was never between 50 and 70. It's only below or above those numbers.
Yeah, which means we're either just like weeping and the tears are freezing on our face, or we're just sweating out of our minds.
Yeah, that's fucking Midwest spring. Christ. I have been moving into my new place, and it has been a hassle.
Yeah? What's been the worst? I was gonna say a best part about moving, but I don't know if there is a good part about moving.
The worst and the best have been the same thing, and it's that I've visited IKEA 3 times in 1 week. I was actually going to go a 4th time, but I was so tired that I turned around and came home and took a nap instead. It could have been 4. It could have been 4. IKEA gets worse the more you go. But that first time, oh my god, the first time you go in a year, yeah. All right.
You just went so many times because you were craving those sweet, sweet furniture meatballs, huh?
It wasn't my intention to crave them, but here we are.
Well, yeah, here we are. Unfortunately, you didn't make it a 4th time, so apparently you didn't crave them enough.
Yeah, I'm sorry to IKEA, but we've drifted apart in the last 3 days. As for you, though, Claire, I have promised to read you something that I think will delight you, because I know you are a hater of secular music. The demon which haunts our lives, yes. Secular music.
I truly am. I just wanted to say, I truly am, and you know I am, because without prompting, I'm wearing my Need to Breathe shirt today, which is a classically Christian band, Need to Breathe. So yeah, I only listen to Switchfoot, that one band Vanessa always talks about, Super Chick, Girls and Chicks, Chicks for God, I don't know what they're called, and Need to Breathe. Those are my only 3 musical recommendations.
Well, I've got good news for you. I've gone on my favorite website, churchleaders.com, and found a piece for you called "Is Secular Music a Sin?" It was written last year around this time by a church leader I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure our listeners will recognize, named Megan Briggs.
Megan.
This is a hot piece. Let me jump right into it. Megan writes, "It may not rise to the level of justification by works versus justification by faith alone, but the debate over whether Christians should listen to secular music is a prominent one." I want to stop right here just by saying I do think this is as important as justification by works versus justification by faith. I do think we should have schisms over whether you can listen to secular music. But that's just my soapbox. And then she refers us to a video by someone named Joe Solomon. But unfortunately, Joe has made this video private, so I wasn't able to watch it.
Wow. Only worthy eyes can watch it.
Yeah, Joe, I'm not mad, but I am disappointed.
Just like the Lord will be if you listen to Coldplay.
We can read some of the words that Joe has inspired. Joe Solomon here reminds viewers of a basic precept that, in general, music affects your mood, which in turn affects your behavior. This does not mean that we will always act on what is being said in music, but we have to acknowledge that not only does music provide us information that shapes our worldview, but it will also bring a mood, whether we acknowledge it or not. For instance, a couple who is wanting to be romantic will probably not listen to headbanging rap, nor will criminals listen to slow R&B before they rob a bank. Is that true?
Is that true? Is that true?
More importantly, what stereotypes are we playing with here?
I'm so fascinated because it seems like the argument here is that if you listen to a certain type of song, you are more inclined to do a certain type of thing. But it's like, I listen to Johnny Cash, but I don't like want to ride a horse and rob the Wells Fargo wagon. You know, like I'm just not. It's not my bag. You know.
Okay, but don't you listen to Johnny Cash before doing Johnny Cash-esque things like oh god, maybe like fucking up a romantic relationship or like driving a car angrily down the road? Aren't those instances where you're being energized by the cash?
I will say, Johnny Cash does energize me when I think about how God's gonna cut me down.
Christ. That's a good
Yeah,
song.
exactly.
That's a good song regardless of whether you are Christian.
It is a good
You just
song.
have to avoid being menaced by him because
Yeah.
you know what? Enough said. Our fellow Christians our fellow Christians can make up their minds about the the good or bad intentions of Johnny Cash. Um let me get back to Megan here. She
Yeah, sorry,
says,
Megan.
put simply, music is powerful. But Solomon isn't advocating that all secular music needs to be trashed by Christians. In fact, there are some love songs written and sung by secular artists that are not contradictory to a biblical view of love. She unfortunately does not list any.
Oh,
But
okay. Rip. I
she
was very, very excited to see what Megan believed were the good secular love songs.
she is going to encourage us to not trash things like secular painting, sculpture, movies, or even buildings that were not created by Christians. Although we should be trashing some, just not all, obviously.
Just not all.
She quotes
Do you ever see a building and you're like, that wasn't a Christian? You see, like, the Citibank and you're like, you know who built that? Atheists.
pagans.
Scientologists.
Scientologists.
Pagans.
She's going to quote the Apostle Paul here, who was dialoguing with pagan philosophers in Athens. He quoted, "For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." That's Acts 17:28. If you want to confirm that in your Bible,
In my personal Bible.
in your personal Bible that you carry around on your neck.
I'll tell you a secret about my personal Bible, Luke. And I promise we can get back to Megan.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a secret about my personal Bible. I've actually taken all sections that were supposedly authored by Paul and simply put them in the trash.
Oh my.
I'm a Peter purist, which means that I just don't respect Paul in any way.
Yeah. You know, more and more of my friends have been doing that. But I am trying to remain universal. I'm trying not to choose a side. Let me just
That's understandable.
hope
It
we
was
don't.
a big feud.
I'm just hoping we don't have more Paul later in this piece.
Yeah. Respect. I can pull him out of my trash and I'll check that Acts verse for you.
Megan is letting us know that Paul wasn't saying this to support the worship of false gods, but instead he was using their culture against their culture. He was how would Adbusters has this, don't they? They're culture jamming. Paul was culture jamming Greek paganism. Paul was the Apostle Paul was the Occupy Wall Street of Greece in 30 CE.
Paul and 3 other Christians were just getting in the way of Greece.
Greece went in a rough direction after Paul intellectually dominated them. Nonetheless, so we're avoiding a free-for-all for Christians listening to secular music, but we're also going to acknowledge that we don't want to glorify sinful behavior. I do have another Apostle Paul quotation here. But Megan is assuring us that
That's
the
fine.
Holy Spirit is writing it through him. Do you find that acceptable?
Fine.
We have by his hand in Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever. Okay, this is too long. Anyway, he wants us to think about these things. He wants to think about what's lovely, commendable, honorable, you know, like the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Like our commendable Boy Scouts.
Like Maroon 5's The Map That Leads to You. The Map That Leads to You.
Classic Christian jam. Megan wants us to bring it all together by talking about how we're not just keeping a list of rules, but we're striving to get to the issue of what our music is doing to our hearts and minds. She gives this great analogy. Imagine a guy driving a car. Imagine yourself, Claire, as a guy driving a car with your wife. Your wife is your passenger, you're driving, you control the radio, you're jamming out to a song that brags about a guy cheating on his wife. Now, common sense would tell us.
Shaggy. It wasn't me. That's what I'm jamming out to in this mind palace.
Dear listener, please imagine Claire jamming out to It Wasn't Me by Shaggy. Common sense would tell us that your wife in this situation would be hurt and rightfully demand that he change the song. Though Claire may justify this by saying that Claire would never actually cheat on her. We actually... Oh, Megan, you've miswritten here. We actually use this type of reasoning in our relationship with someone infinitely more important, God. So let us, as Christians, continue to throw off these things that stop or hinder us as we pursue maturity in Jesus. A great place to start is to discern and possibly spurn the tunes that are impacting more than our ears. Claire, are you ready to spurn some tunes that are impacting your heart?
I love to spurn tunes. If you ask any of my friends, they will say, you ask any of my friends, what is Claire's number one activity? They say spurnin' tunes. Claire's always spurning those tunes.
Evangelicals may be taking over our culture. I'm one of these evangelical adbusters. Correctly taking over the culture with their clear-sighted but also kind of punk rock critiques of how bad secularism is, and it's reminding me of another movement. I can't keep up the bit because this is too despicable. Is people I knew in high school sharing sort of conservative Catholic theology. About how we need to accept sort of those of us who are drawn to gay and gender non-conforming activity.
Those of us.
How we need to accept them and then teach them to behave as straight as possible.
This is like culturally, we're doing a cultural birdcage. Like,
yeah.
That's just people being like, culturally, we're going to take all of the gays and make them do the Nathan Lane as John Wayne walk.
I'm thinking it may be a sort of Mother Teresa complex where your suffering actually makes you more holy. And in this case, it's like your tragic identity as a gay person. We will not judge it. Because it actually makes you stronger. Because then you can become a youth pastor who talks about how you can have these feelings, but just it will make you stronger to not perform them, institutionalize them, give them credibility, or act on them in any way, but instead repress that for Jesus.
This is like classic secular but Christian adjacent song by Kelly Clarkson, Stronger, because what doesn't kill you, parentheses, homosexuality, makes you stronger.
If music, and I think especially pop, maybe most of all pop rock, the most demonic form of music, is pulling us away from Jesus, I'm wondering if we could theorize a type of music that would be the most demonic and anti-Christian possible. And I don't think it would be like Satanist metal. I think that Satanist metal may test us. It may play with Christianity. But I believe what we should truly fear and scorn is music which will neglect Christianity entirely.
Yeah, it's Satanist metal is, by denouncing us, sort of raising us up. It's like when you ban books or abortions. It's just like, oh, well, maybe now I'll get an abortion just because that's cool.
Just because it's cool. That's the direction we're heading.
Just because it's cool. Yeah. And that's what metal bands do with Jesus. They're like, we hate this guy. And so then all kinds of kids are like, well, now I want to know about this guy that those yelling men hate. But I think, okay, I'm gonna submit a genre here.
Okay.
I think the most anti-Christian genre is activist folk.
Like Woody Guthrie? Like Woody Guthrie is the most satanic artist of the American... Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, like early Bob Dylan, but not late Bob Dylan.
Yes. I'm thinking truly like, hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Like, truly upsetting pieces of folk music. None of them ever mention God at all. So they're both putting our attention on what the left wants and not talking about God, even in a way that's going to make the kids go, wow, God's edgy and cool.
My memory of Tom Dooley, which is spotty, because I have not listened to it recently, is that it's a song that's obsessed with death and crime and judgment, but it's purely material. The final judgment is to be hanging from the wide oak tree, and so a good opportunity to be judged by God passed by. Listeners,
passed by.
If God is referenced, or hell, or damnation, please contact Claire and not me. But for now, I'm ready to declare Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, to be the most anti-Christian song of all time. And I'm placing a fatwa upon you to never listen to it.
Yes, it is banned. Herefore, us and Megan Briggs have banned Tom Dooley.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the next object we've prepared for our audience. I gave you something, and you gave me something, and I'm wondering if you want to go first, or if you want to give it to me.
I'll go first, because I believe from the bottom of my heart that your review will be better than mine. And so if I go first, then it's fine. Then no one has to be like, oh man, Luke did a great job and Claire did a bad job. They could be like, wow, that was a nice intro into the great work Luke did.
That's troubling. That scares me. I don't like that kind of setup. But I did give Claire one of the greatest poems, probably the greatest poem of all time. An early T.S. Eliot poem called Sweeney Among the Nightingales.
Is it the greatest poem of all time?
Yes.
Do we believe
I'm excited for you to confirm for me that this is the greatest poem of all time.
It is a good poem. I do like it, but it took me a few readings before I got to that conclusion.
This is I gave you a bizarre poem. I gave you a pretty bizarre poem.
It is extremely weird. Yeah.
You know, I don't want to give you too much. You go first.
Okay. So here's a few things about me. I am personally enemies with T.S. Eliot. The reason for that is I simply don't like him. But I will make an exception for his book, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, which, despite the crimes that Andrew Lloyd Webber sort of later committed upon that text, is actually a good and cute book of poems about cats. So anyway, by just giving me a T.S. Eliot piece to read, you have already doomed me to a certain level of despising.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know. And then the second thing is that so Sweeney Among the Nightingales is a rhymed poem. It's
yeah, it sure fucking is.
It's a rhymed poem. And look, whatever, there are some cool things you can do with rhymed poetry, but I am doomed to forever read rhymed poems in a terrible sing-song voice. I'm like university trained to read poems good. And yet somehow I see a rhymed poem and I cannot help myself from being like da 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 da.
Do you want to give that experience to our listeners right now?
Sure. Do you want me to read the whole poem, or should I just read a couple stanzas?
What do the people want? Can you hear the people right now? I think.
Yeah. I'm listening. What do you think the people want, Luke?
The people are saying you must read this entire poem. The people are saying we don't want to miss a single line of Sweeney Among the Nightingales by T.S. Eliot.
All right.
This 100-year-old poem, right now the audience is screaming and writhing for it.
They're writhing for it. You have to know there is no way for me to prevent the way that this will be read, which is badly.
Go ahead.
No matter what I do, it will be sing-songy. Alright, this is called Sweeney Among the Nightingales. It's by T.S. Eliot. Ape-necked Sweeney spread his knees, letting his arms hang down to laugh, the zebra stripes along his jaw swelling to maculate giraffe. The circles of the stormy moon slid westward toward the river plate, Death and the raven drift above, and Sweeney guards the horned gate. Gloomy Orion and the dog are veiled and hushed the shrunken seas. The person in the Spanish cape tries to sit on Sweeney's knees. Slips and pulls the tablecloth, overturns a coffee cup. Reorganized upon the floor, she yawns and draws a stocking up. The silent man in mocha brown sprawls at the windowsill and gapes. The waiter brings in oranges, banana figs, and hothouse grapes. The silent vertebrate in brown contracts and concentrates, withdraws. Rachel, née Rabinovich, tears at the grapes with murderous paws. She and the lady in the cape are suspect, thought to be in league. Therefore the man with heavy eyes declines the gambit, shows fatigue. Leaves the room and reappears outside the window, leaning in. Branches of wisteria circumscribe a golden grin. The host with someone indistinct converses at the door apart. The nightingales are singing near the convent of the Sacred Heart, and sang within the bloody wood when Agamemnon cried aloud, and let their liquid siftings fall to stain the stiff dishonored shroud. Thank you.
Hey, what a reading.
See, but there's just no way to read something rhymed that's not like that.
No, I respect it. This poem is so funny, and I have never laughed at it. There's no punchline. It's all just the the anti-romance of the dinner party where everyone is doing various weird things, or the description of tearing at the grapes with murderous paws. It's an absurd humor rather than an actually laughing out loud humor. And then the weirdness of this transition at the end, where we go into a mythic tone, where the liquid siftings are falling on the shroud. What a bizarre poem.
It's so strange. It's so strange. It's kind of fun because you have the woman in the Spanish cape and another woman ? And they're sort of conspiring apparently against Sweeney, who seems to be just an old annoying sort of man.
Yeah.
And my man brings up freaking Agamemnon, who is sort of one of the more unfortunate Greek heroes, right?
Yeah.
Because Agamemnon sort of popularly in the myth faces the wrath of his wife. And so I think we're supposed to understand Sweeney as just an unfortunate figure facing the wrath of a bunch of women.
Agamemnon is really the like the shitty burdened half of Achilles. Achilles is like the glorious and tragic half, and Agamemnon is also tragic. Like he has to sacrifice his daughter, but it's always his own fault. He's like
yes.
the grandest scale fuck up guy. Whereas at least Achilles is glorious. And T.S. Eliot was never in his entire life like glorious. He was always miserable.
Yeah, T.S. Eliot is sort of a worm or like a weasel-like little man. And so it really fits the voice of T.S. Eliot for him to just write about a worm or weasel-like little man.
Phenomenal poet, though. I know he's your personal enemy, but...
No, he's a really good poet. I just like to hate.
As you should. Was there anything else you want to hit here? I keep bouncing in.
No, it's perfect. I think the only other thing is that though I despise rhymed poems, I think the rhymes here kind of did a lot of work in like mythologizing this kind of pedestrian, nasty little scene. So as you're reading it, you sort of are like, ooh, this is legendary, but it's actually just disgusting.
Eliot really likes that, especially like a folk melody or like something that feels a bit all I can think of is the shittiest example, which is like Hollow Man. He's all around the prickly pear. It's not even a good example because I don't know the rhythm of it. But he's really he just does like a pastiche of things, and they're often sort of like vaguely timeless things, which belong specifically to like 1910. But through his weird concoction, becomes something greater and more fucked up.
I think that's the, like, for me, the thing about proof rock, not to just pull in another T.S. Eliot poem, but is just, that poem is so exhausting, but it's so timeless, even though it's, like, very clearly a sort of early 20th century moment. Like, you read it and you're like, damn, okay, maybe we're all suffering from ennui. I don't know.
Eliot, as a young man, has the same fear of age that Yeats also had as, like, a relatively young man. I feel like Yeats was, like, 35, and he was like, I'm an ancient, dying marble triton. People neglect me. And T.S. Eliot is like, yeah, same. Like his, like, proof rock's hair growing thin and rolling his trousers up. God, what a good poem.
Anyway,
I love a young, sad, anxious man.
Yeah, that is a real poetry archetype, is just young man feels weight of time.
For fucking real. All right. This is the heavy one for me. Claire, you asked me to read an essay by a favorite writer of yours, Zadie Smith.
Oh,
and
yeah, baby.
The title of this essay is Joy. And I want to address you, dear listener, here instead of Claire, because I know what you're thinking when you hear the title Joy, and you're completely right. Claire, whatever Claire feels is completely wrong. Any essay titled Joy is the product of a twisted mind. So
yes.
In this essay, we see Smith making this bold and very questionable claim that pleasure and joy are different things. Pleasure she experiences in small doses on sort of a daily basis. Food, people watching, so on. Joy is something more elusive, and Smith reveals that in her young life, I think in her pre-mother era, she had known joy only 5 times, perhaps 6. In a more just world, this claim of 6 moments of joy would be audited by some sort of governmental entity. And we could finally achieve a world where literature could be responsibly managed. I think Bjork sounded sort of a warning about this in like the 80s or 90s. In a funny bit about TV. She says, you shouldn't let poets lie to you. And we are constantly being lied to by poets.
Constantly. That's their whole deal, though. Poets are all about lying, but they lie in a way that's very pretty. And I do think this essay is very pretty.
Well, I think that there should be some sort of body that manages this, and few people have the vision to implement it, and none of us are currently in power. And so tragically, Zadie Smith can continue to get away with potentially lying to us. We'll establish this.
Not the Sad Goose, the Hot Goose Summer podcast officially here calls upon Joseph Robinette Biden to establish the Keeping Poets Accountable Commission.
Please, Joe, you have literally nothing better to do. There is no policy I can think of that is more pressing than keeping poets accountable.
Get to it, Joe.
You will be supported by me, by Claire, and by Bjork.
Yeah, and who else do you really need to be supported by?
Let me,
Yes, so please continue.
In this essay, Smith really wants to describe the most ambiguous of these 5 or 6 joyful occasions. This is one that takes place in a nightclub. So Smith finds herself ecstatically dancing with this stranger who she describes as being of universal feeling of goodwill towards all men and women, no matter their creed or state of inebriation. She calls this man Smiley, and she describes his willingness to support you. See how she uses you here? This is very manipulative. This is very poetic. You, Claire, she describes how you, Smiley is supporting you through your drug-complicated episodes of hunger, nausea, other logistical and emotional struggles emergent from a night of late partying. And it's made all the sweeter by his sort of wondrous lack of desire to rob, scam, or sleep with you. On the dance floor, Smith experiences joy, probably. She thinks it's joy at some points and doesn't at others. See how I'm struggling on your behalf to avoid the lies that poets and other literary types are perpetrating all the time. She doesn't give footnotes about her emotional states at these moments. We're expected to trust her. She's describing joy here as a sort of self-dissolution. She says, I have pleasure. It's a feeling I want to experience and own. A beach holiday is a pleasure. A new dress is a pleasure. But on that dance floor, I was joy, or some small piece of joy, with all these other hundreds of people who were also a part of joy. Which is sweet. But the part of the complication, and this isn't the only complication, is that Smiley is a bit of a troubling figure. He probably doesn't have, he's very attentive here, but he probably, and we know he's not trying to fiscally or sexually exploit us, but he is, quote, mimicking joy's conditions pretty well. He has good vibes, but we do feel like he is maybe parasitizing our joy in a way that's harmful to Smith's joy as well. So the next morning, she finds that the whole situation is spoiled not just by the hangover, but also by this morning recognition that what felt so significant or transformative, Smith says sublime, last night just isn't. You when you're leaning your head on someone's shoulder and speaking something of great importance to you at 3 a.m., it usually is not ultimately of great. It can, the morning's light makes what is beautiful turn to shit. And of course, on a further level, there's the banality of dealing with encountering Smiley sleeping on Smith's couch, up before her, smoking a joint, and then requesting cab fare. He's become banal, boring, and unpleasant There is unambiguous joy in this piece, but it's mainly like referenced kind of gently. It's maybe too hot to touch for poets and other floaty types. Many of these are moments of love, but I think a key example is that expanding beyond these 5 or 6 instances of joy is because a sort of malign outsider has entered her life in the form of her 2-year-old child. We discover that...
Okay.
Yeah.
In her defense, I have never met a 2-year-old child that is not a malign outsider.
No, that's very fair. But apparently, this child, this despicable thing, this demonic entity, it is also a source of joy.
Yeah.
So Smith has these sort of caricatures, describing to her husband the look of people's faces, and then he will describe back the strange people he has seen, is a source of pleasure for her, but not so much joy. And they have gotten this bit that they seem to have been doing for 8 years at this point, where they sort of speak out their dog's emotions and actions. They speak in the dog's voice. They make embarrassing dog observations and comments. And their 2-year-old child interrupts them and says, "You're being the dog." She says, "Stop being the dog. It's very silly." They're ashamed. Their child triumphs over them. Their child annihilates any sense of self-confidence or pleasure they have. And it seems to Smith, at least I'm reading into this, that this is also a joyful moment. She describes this kind of thing as an admixture of terror, pain, and delight that I've come to recognize as joy and must find some way to live with daily. Let me pull something aside here. Claire, they are right to be ashamed, aren't they?
Yes.
If you impersonate your dog, you should be ashamed.
Yes, I impersonate my dog, and every single time I do it, there's a moment after where I'm like, thank God no one else saw that.
But if they did, would you feel joy and terror? Or just
I would certainly
shame?
I think I would feel a little joy and terror, but mostly shame. It's mostly like, please disregard that you heard me speak in the most upsetting little voice.
I've been theorizing that there are some who do voices and some who do not. And that I am tending on the side of do not. And part of that is that my beloved mother did voices when I was growing up. When someone had made an enemy of her, she would be like, so and so was like, meh, 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 meh. And it would enrage me for no reason. But now I'm justified by this yes, evil, but perceptive 2-year-old child of Zadie Smith's. And I just remember I think severely harming my mom by being like, please don't do that voice. And I'm not sure I've heard her do it since.
Luke actually came on this podcast just to talk out some like childhood traumas he committed upon his family.
On the topic of mom bits, my mom confided to me that when I was a child, I would sort of very rarely ask for things. And once we were at like Subway, and I asked very sweetly, when I was like, 6 years old or some other dumbass age, like, can I have a cookie? And she was like, no. And I was like, okay. And then I never asked for it again. She said it would hang on her. It would like hang on her for years. Like, he only wanted this one cookie. I denied him the only thing he wanted.
I denied him his one material pleasure.
It's the child's revenge upon the parent. We each accidentally harm each other in deep ways. And for Zadie Smith, I guess she masochistically enjoys being shamed by an infant.
Yeah. I think it's funny to get shamed by infants, so I understand that. It rules. I love when they tell me to not do stuff. I'm like, yeah? Oh. Okay.
The only, like, independent voice in this essay is the voice of this 2-year-old child. And I think if the child can remember these incidents, this would be an avenue to sort of assess the honesty of Zadie Smith and determine whether she should be allowed to continue publishing.
Yeah, so Joe Biden, contact that 2-year-old instantly.
It will. There's a jurisdictional problem. Like, she's a UK person, right?
She's a UK person, but she is an instructor at NYU. She's probably faculty in it. I don't know why I said instructor. She's probably the god of NYU.
Joe Biden, NYU, State of New York, all of you need to help me out.
The Coast Guard.
The Coast Guard, yeah. The FDA, ChristianMinisters.com. Just all my people. Yeah. All the people I trust. I
Switchfoot, Need to Breathe.
Super Chick.
Girl Chick. Yeah, girl Super Chick.
Bowling for Soup. Blur. Anyone who has any...
The lead singer of Coldplay who is or used to be married to Gwyneth Paltrow. Unclear.
At Drill. People who post their OnlyFans on Twitter. Any one of you could be the one who saves the world from Zadie Smith. Let me drag us down another different avenue.
Yes.
I want to contrast Smith here with a Philip Lopate. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name here. Lopate. Philip Lopate essay, which is provocatively titled "Against Joie de Vivre." So through this essay, he drags us through this sort of miserable sequence of, like, first there's tropical lounging, then there's dinner parties, then there's he references dogs learning to be helpless when they're given electric shocks. And then he eventually is just talking about depression. But at the midpoint of this essay, he finds himself explaining how he has this lifelong experience of general insecurity and powerlessness that's been punctuated by these transcendent, exceptional moments of intimacy, which nonetheless are falling among other instances of, like, trying too hard or getting bored or becoming confused and tired of partners or tired of drug use or tired of life itself. He says, to know rapture is to have one's whole life poisoned. And so he ends at the end of this essay quoting Simone Weil, this, like, this French existential resistance woman. She's this patron saint of normally clear-minded writers who find, like, normie existentialism is too obvious. We won't quote Camus. We're going to quote someone who's more contradictory and more punishing to Luke. And so the Simone Weil quotation here is, "The soul knows for certain only that it is hungry. The important thing is that it announces its hunger by crying. A child does not stop crying if we suggest to it that perhaps there is no bread. It goes on crying just the same. The danger is not lest the soul should doubt whether there is any bread, but lest, by a lie, it should persuade itself that it is not hungry." Philip is staying hungry. And it's something like, but something also unlike Smith, who concludes, surely, if we were sane and reasonable, we would every time choose a pleasure over a joy, as animals themselves sensibly do. The end of a pleasure brings no great harm to anyone, after all, and can always be replaced with another, of more or less equal worth. As a sane and reasonable person, I cannot understand Zadie Smith's discussion of joy. In light of Smith's disappointing pro-natalist agenda, her repeated appearances in The New Yorker, and her troubling cultural alignment with David Foster Wallace, I give this essay 4 silly dog voices out of 5.
Nice. That's very good. Yeah, David Foster. Oh, yeah. When I first read Zadie Smith, I read White Teeth, which remains to this day my favorite novel.
Mm.
And in class, because we read it for a class, and then I read it on my own several times, we talked so much about how much Zadie Smith is influenced by David Foster Wallace. And yet every time I go to read David Foster Wallace, I simply don't. Because I don't like it.
He is a real piece of work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've said this before, but I'll continue saying it. I loved Infinite Jest when I read it 7 years ago. But that nonfiction, which is what people tend to like more, is so fucking irritating. He's so clever. He's so...
And you know I hate cleverness. There is nothing more annoying to me
than people?
Writing that Stop. Is clever. Yeah, quit that.
Dear listener, if you're being clever, stop.
You quit that. I don't like that.
There's only one clever man, and that's Zadie Smith.
Yeah. And cleverness is the enemy of being genuine. It's like, feel, goddammit. Feel something. Don't just cop out by winking at me. I don't want to be winked at. I want to weep.
All right, let's I'm feeling good about this episode. I think we've informed the people to stop listening to secular music.
Yeah.
We've introduced them to probably the greatest poem of all time. And we've given them some critical tools to diffuse, potential deception by poets and other artists like Zadie Smith.
Yeah. We've really made sure that the people who listen to our podcast go into things thinking, I hate artists and I don't want to hear what they have to say.
And if that's the only thing you learned this year, that's a good one. All right. It sounds like the summer is over. It sounds like for this week, summer is over. Go back to spring, go ahead to fall, doesn't matter.
But until
we
can, I was gonna say, but until next week, no fucking summer.
If I see you outside, if I see you wearing a bathing suit, if there is one flip-flop on my street, hell to pay.
I'll lose it. All
right, fam. This was Hot Goose Summer. We will catch you next week.
Bye.
Mwah.
Mwah.